What a nice problem, waiting for everybody to be quiet. But that's a good problem to have. All right, good to have everybody with us. We need to wrap up Philippians 1 tonight. I'm looking at the calendar. I'm like, wow, we just flew through October, so we're going to have to pick up the pace a little bit. But I think I've got it laid out pretty good. I did not ask someone to lead prayer. John, would you direct us in prayer, please? All right, we're gonna kind of pick up where we left off on Sunday. We need to back up just a little bit, but there was one question in that last section that I wanted to address this evening, just for a couple of moments. And we were talking a lot about, Paul's desire to leave, to want to be with Christ, and then him remaining on with the Philippians was far better for them. But what we didn't ask, and it might be an obvious answer, but I'd like to put it out there anyway, is what were the benefits to the Philippians for remaining on, for Paul remaining on in the flesh? And even if it seems obvious for you, let's state it. What was the benefits to them? Randy. I think you're exactly right. We've already talked about the relationship that Paul and the Philippians had, and I think you're exactly right. Also, keeping in mind, we're still talking about a very young, relatively young church. Even at 10 years, the church is new, well into its growing pains, and here's this relationship that they have with Paul, and they're looking for him to give them strength. And Randy, you kind of rolled into the second half of this question here, and it was just more of a subtle in the teaching and the education and the knowledge within our own group. And just take advantage of it. Because at any moment we could lose that. And it's just something to think about. Terry. Right. And it's just another thought when you said that was not to Paul's glory. That's one of the things we've noted. None of this has been to Paul's glory, and you point that out. He points us right back to Christ. Ed.
In 167, he had prayed that God would complete what he had started in them. And 2, he's going to come back to talk about working out salvation with fear and trembling.
Right.
3, he's going to talk about his desire that he grow into the Lord, and that they also do the same. So the implication of that is that the same kinds of things that he was looking forward to, serving other people, the Philippians were going to have that same future.
Right, exactly. So let's come back now. Let's look at verses 27 through the end of the chapter. We left Sunday talking about this living in a manner worthy of Christ. And what really was Paul talking about there? We had a good discussion, but I got a couple more things I want to say. What in particular was Paul referring to when talk about living your manner of life worthy of the gospel? Citizenship. Remember that? We talked about citizenship on Sunday. And that's exactly, I believe, what Paul's talking about here. He's talking about their citizenship. So if you allow me just to back up a little bit for a little bit of a review so we can pick up the thought again. So life as citizens was that an important analogy for the Philippians? Yes, and why? Philippians were, yes, Al. Say it again? Yeah, they were citizens in Rome. In fact, I was doing some reading this week, and maybe some of you can verify this. Several writings referred to Philippi as Little Rome. It was such a replica, maybe that's not a good word, but it was such a representative of Rome, the culture, the way they dressed, everything, that it was often referred to as Little Rome. So Paul's using this analogy to do what? To shake them up a little bit. And not in a negative way, but you're Roman citizens. That's great. You understand the customs, everything about it, and the importance and your allegiance to Caesar. What Christ is calling us to, what Christ is calling the Philippians to, is a higher citizenship, a higher identity, a higher standard of conduct, a higher allegiance. So that this idea of their life would be live in a way worthy of the gospel and this heavenly citizenship. But another thought came to my mind. Actually, it came this afternoon. I was looking at this. Go over to Acts 22 for a moment. I just want us to take a moment to remember who's talking here. Paul. Look in Acts chapter 22, and let's pick it up in verse 22. Paul is in imprisonment in Jerusalem. So Acts 22, verse 22. Up to this word, they listened to him. They raised their voices and said, "Away with such a fellow from the earth, for he should not be allowed to live." And as they were shouting and throwing off their cloaks and flinging dust in the air, the tribune ordered him to be brought into the barracks, saying that he should be examined by flogging to find out why they were shouting against him like this. But when they had stretched him out for the whips, Paul said to the centurion who was standing by, "Is it lawful for you to flog a man who is a Roman citizen and uncondemned?" When the centurion heard this, he went to the tribune and said to him, "What are you about to do? For this man is a Roman citizen." So the tribune came to him and said, "Tell me, are you a Roman citizen?" And he said, "Yes." They answered, "I bought this citizenship for a large sum." Paul says, "I am a citizen by birth." This afternoon, I was looking at it in between lunch break or something on my class, and it just, for me, it took it to another level. Here is this man who is a Roman citizen, who's in prison, who has rights to everything. And is he taking advantage of it? No. Right? He's demonstrating once again that Paul himself belongs to a higher citizenship or a higher allegiance. Again, you look at this, Paul's thinking, is it legal for you to flog me? And of course, the question is, or the observation is, Roman citizenship had great privileges. That's where my mind went, is being a Roman citizen had great privileges. So when Paul uses this word conduct, back up there in that verse, it would have challenged the Philippians as they were reminded of their Roman citizenship. So Paul's amazing to me. I know that he worked through the power of the Holy Spirit. I understand that. But when you sit here and you read these letters, and you have to kind of just pause for a moment and notice all the opportunities Paul takes to look at their situation, where they're at, what their surroundings, their culture is. He always takes that situation and ties it in and says, this is what you have, this is what you see, let's see what we have in Christ. And this is what he's done here. And to me, it's really, really awesome. I absolutely love it. I want to continue on here. So Paul's reminding them that their heavenly citizenship, as we've been talking about, was greater than Rome's. That's what he's saying. It's above Rome citizenship. And we should take honor in that. But for Rome, is there a hand? Oh, yes. Sorry. action there. I mean, just think about that from our... Yeah, I mean, you think about that. I bought this. And Paul looks at... I mean, here's Paul stretched out, ready to get flogged. And he turns around, I guess, looks at the soldier and says, I was born a Roman citizen. Big difference. Ed, good point.
What pops into my head is the whole conversation we had in the Ephesian letter, that we're in this kingdom because we're adopted sons.
Right.
And so that, again, we didn't have to buy it. We're talking about living worthy of it as though we have to earn it.
Right.
We're talking about living in a way that fits with this kind of citizenship.
Right. Roommate. I mean, Jeff.
That's quite a point right there. Paul gave up a very rich Jewish tradition.
Right.
And he gave up citizenship in Rome, a very comfortable lifestyle. He talked about how great Paul is just a moment ago. He felt what he gave up, and people are looking at him like he's crazy.
Right.
And he's making a point.
Exactly. Thank you. Appreciate that. And my thought, too, another thought here, for Rome, it was Caesar, right? And what I mean is, if you were, I'm not a great historian in this area, but from what I've read and understand, if you walked around Rome and stuff, you saw the figure of Caesar. It was always placed in front of you, you might say. It was always, that was your allegiance. You were constantly reminded that you had an allegiance to Caesar. For God's people, it's Christ. His image is written on our hearts. And this is just another message that Paul has given the Philippians as well as us. And I can just imagine, I'm guessing here, each time the Philippians perhaps saw the image of Caesar, perhaps they were reminded that they had an allegiance to a higher power. And I would just, I would assume that was something that would run through their heads as they went through things and faced possible persecution and fears. Maybe they were reminded, yeah, that's Caesar, but I'm a citizen of God's kingdom. And Paul's not going to stop reminding them of this. And I think that goes back to this question, but it goes back to another reason perhaps why Paul knew it was important to stay. As long as I can stay and build these brethren up, that's what's going to be best for them. So we together can enjoy the presence of Christ one day. So much can be said. So Paul's saying, whatever happens in this life, whatever you go through, always remember your citizenship is in heaven. And that's the lesson for us. And that's challenging sometimes. I'm just going to say personally, at times it's challenging because sometimes I know that I forget or my actions are representative of another citizenship rather than one in heaven. And so we'll talk about this a little bit more. Questions, comments up to this point? Make sure I'm not missing anybody here. All right. Couple more thoughts on this idea of the manner of life, and then I want to get into these 3 points that he brings up. Another thought on this idea of living this manner of life. Christianity means living the life worthy of the gospel. You know, Paul makes this point in a number of the other letters. I've got Ephesians 4:1, Colossians 1:10, 1 Thessalonians 2. But when we look back there, coming back to Philippians, when we look back where he talked about that progress and joy, remember we talked about that on Sunday? He's still tying these two together. That their progress and their joy is demonstrated in their citizenship. So he's bringing this all together. Remember we talked about progress was not just a matter of being a good Christian and having knowledge. It was a matter of living, experiencing, suffering trials. So Paul's taking this whole thing and just bringing this together. Your manner of life, your citizenship should be seen and result in the progress and the joy in the faith. Again, living our life in such a way that what we believe is of supreme worth. And as Jeff pointed out, you know, for Paul to leave that or to deny his Roman citizenship, I think you're right, Jeff. You know, the rest of the world looked at him and says, "You're crazy. You know that you've just lost it. How can you give this up?" But he's demonstrating that in so many ways. So how do we reflect this citizenship? And this is going to take us to the last couple of verses there, here in Philippians. So let's go back over there. So Philippians chapter 1. Let me put my glasses on here. So talking about the manner of life, latter part of verse 27. Let me just pick it up in 27 again. Only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel of Christ, so whether I come and see you or am absent, I may hear of you that you are. Here's where Paul begins to list several characteristics of citizenship living, or heavenly citizenship living. Standing firm in one spirit with one mind, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel. Not frightened in anything by your opponents. This is a clear sign to them of their destruction, but of your salvation, and that from God. For it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake, engaged in the same conflict that you saw I had and now hear that I still have. All right. So as we look at these three or four characteristics, keep in mind that these are still under the heading of our heavenly citizenship. So we want to make sure we keep that connection. So what's the first thing that Paul brings out there in the latter part of verse 27? He's talking about right thinking. What does it mean to stand firm in one spirit? Let's make sure we clarify that. What's the idea there? Standing firm in one spirit, and then we'll elaborate on it. On the oneness there. What is the one spirit? Randy's smiling. Go ahead, Randy. Right. That's right. And that's where our unity, that's what we're going to talk about. Ed.
Yeah, in the Old Testament and in the New, the way that people are looked at is that there is the flesh, God brings the spirit into it, and you became a living soul. And so you have flesh and soul and spirit. And he uses two of those terms here, that you got to have the same spirit and the same soul, as it's translated in mine in lots of translations.
Right.
And in that, both of those there are demonstrated by this striving together or laboring together in this gospel, this good news of God's will for Jesus Christ. So what strikes me about this is that with all of our spirit and all of our soul, we're united in this working together. And he's going to talk about working out the salvation in the second chapter. And so this is a fellowship. This is a partnership. We're involved in serious work together with our spirit and our soul, our psychological and emotional connection. And that's pretty much all other than the body. Okay?
Right.
That's the whole of man. And so it's a really interesting way of demonstrating, and he wants them to demonstrate their citizenship with everything that they are.
Right. This idea of citizenship means that something should be observable in their walk. And again, Paul's taking this beyond, okay, you believe, you have faith, that's great. But citizenship should be seen, it should be observable. So let's talk about some of these things here. So first thing he says is to stand firm in this one spirit, striving side by side. Paul's talking about unity here. And unity is a key thought throughout Philippians. Mike. Yes. Yeah. Right. Good analogy. I like it. The idea of standing firm gives another picture here, and that is, be mindful that we are under Satan's attack. Be mindful that we are under attack from the world. And just the picture is, and again, I like your analogy, the picture is, here we are standing together. And as Randy pointed out, we have one God. We are under the citizenship of heaven. We don't appeal to Caesar, we appeal to God. And so here we are standing together in this oneness. And how should we reflect that? Is another thought that we should be giving some consideration to here. And a couple ideas that came to my mind. The whole subject of unity and standing together is just a fascinating subject, and we could really go deep into this. Time won't allow us. But look at it this way. Here we are, a group united with one purpose. If we're not standing together, then guess what? We're not citizens of God's kingdom. We're not acting like citizens of the kingdom of God. Because citizens do what? Citizens stand together. Citizens watch out for one another. Roman citizens recognize this. I mean, if you go back to Paul getting there, get flogged, whether he was guilty or not, whoa, wait a minute, time out. We can't flog this guy. He's a Roman citizen. But I carry that thought over to the idea of our heavenly citizenship in the sense that we do have each other's back. There is a protection. There is something that we do for one another. But if we're divided, then we're not representing that kingdom. It is really kind of the simple thought to this. And our singleness of mind. Here's another thing that's beautiful about this picture. And I'm still tying this into Rome. For the Roman citizens to be united, they adhered to Caesar, as I stated. All right? For Christians united in the heavenly citizenship, we have the one faith, the gospel. Did I see a hand go up here a moment ago? Okay, thought I did. You might have to really make some noise for me, because it's time for new glasses. That's why I keep doing this. So anyway, or just yell my name out, or don't throw something at me. Just get my attention. So here's, if we are truly united, let me put it this way. If we are truly focused on the gospel, then unity should not be an issue. Now, some might go, I believe that 100% with all my heart. If we are focused on the gospel, and as we begin to look into chapter 2, following Christ's humility and some of the things Paul is going to offer us and offer the Philippians, unity, the idea of unity, should not be an issue. Ed?
He's already said that whenever these folks were preaching the gospel, even if they were doing it in order to afflict him, that we needed to have this patriotic attitude, that we look at the value of the gospel more than we're interested in getting caught up in some kind of petty, back and forth, whatever the nature of that conflict was. And then he's going to talk about murmuring and complaining too. So there seems to be, and he's talking about guilty and sympathy later on. And so there seems to be a pretty clear application that one thing we need to do is love each other and get off each other's back.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And how often does that come out through the scriptures? Paul states it, Peter states it. Let's get over this pettiness and get back to being united, because those are the things that divide us. But what's happened is we've let the enemy in. We've let Satan in. We've let the world in. Whatever that disguise might have, we've allowed that in. And the Philippians were vulnerable to that, and we are no different. We are no different. We are just as vulnerable to our culture and the things surrounding us today. So easy. Yes? That's right. And along those lines, I tell you what, the enemy loves to see Christians divided. And I'm not using the word Christian in a loose term of anybody who goes to a church who's a believer. I'm talking about disciples of Christ. If they get wind that disciples of Christ, God's people, are divided, they will jump on that and use every opportunity. Grant.
It's important. Describes standing firm in one spirit and being unified. He doesn't say that we should all be members of the same political party, or have the same attitude about vaccine, or take the same stance on even
That's right. That should remain our focus. Exactly. Let's look at verse 28. Let's keep going here. We've got about 20 or 19 minutes. Continuing this thought. So there's the idea of the one-mindedness. I know there's a lot more we could say, but we're going to move on from this. I do want to get this picture at the latter part of verse 27. Get that picture of striving or standing side by side. That's a picture. To me that's a military picture. That's standing side by side. Okay, here's the enemy, maybe arms locked or shields up, whatever it is. That's what we're doing. We're standing side by side, arms locked together in this fight. And we're not going to let anybody go. We're not going to leave anybody out to the wolves. We're going to rescue the perishing. We're going to do everything we can because these are our brothers and sisters in this citizenship. Look at verse 28 now. Not frightened in anything by your opponents. What right does Paul have to tell them that? I'm being a little silly there, right? What? Not frightened in anything. Because Paul's already demonstrated this. Randy. Right. That's right. That's right. We are going to stand before God individually. We're not going to stand before God as the Folsom Church of Christ. Randy's going to stand before God as Randy. I'm going to stand before God. But on this life, God never intended for us to go it alone. He has designed this from the very beginning for us to be together. I mean, if you go back to Adam and Eve, through Abraham, the children of Israel, God's plan was always for family and community. And I just elaborating on Randy's point there is that we have to rely on that. We have to depend on that. Ed.
The other thing is, the thing he points out at the end of this chapter, he also says in 2 Thessalonians 1:5 or 1:4, when he talks about the fact that he's proud of them because of their perseverance and faith in the midst of their persecutions and afflictions which they endure, which is the plain indication of God's righteous judgment. Very similar to what he says here. There's a perspective that the Holy Spirit is commanding for us to have. When we have opponents, that is, especially if we're faithful, when we have opponents, that's a sign that we're doing something right. And it's a sign to them, when they're attacking peaceful, loving people, that they are at war with God.
That's right.
And in 1 Thessalonians 1, he goes on to say, there's going to be punishment and judgment here for them if they don't get this picture and repent. And so we need to have our perspective, this was, as rather than saying with each other, but also, as you were saying, on this final judgment, so that it's all good.
Right.
But not only is it good, when we don't have any opponents, we need to wonder if we're like the false prophets of old, right?
Right.
If we're not, if we can't be convicted of being a Christian, we need to give more evidence.
To that thought, I'm going to go here because you got me thinking about something. Because sometimes the question comes up, or you hear somebody say, "Well, if you're not being persecuted, you're not being a Christian." A little time out there. I'm gonna hold on a second. All right. Here's what we need to be careful of: are we being persecuted for the right thing? That's the thing. I mean, there are those who I'm being persecuted. Okay, what are you being persecuted for? Because of my political stance on this. Oh, all right, that's admirable that that's your conviction on Second Amendment or something like that. That's admirable. But I tell you what, that has nothing to do with my and yours relationship to God. So that's something to keep in mind. It's one of those things. Joy Moyer put a little art. He does these little blurbs in Facebook, and the other day he asked, "What hill are you willing to die on?" And I thought, wow, that was a really good point. So if we're going to choose a hill to die on, it's got to be the gospel. That's what it has to be. And when we do that, then we're going to get persecution. We sit here and we think about the first century church. We think about what Peter was preparing those brethren for. And we look at the persecution in Jerusalem and all the things that these Christians were getting ready, or their children were getting ready to go through. I cannot fathom that. And there's times I stop and say, well, am I being persecuted? Yes, we are. Maybe not to a... We also have to be careful that our measurement's going to be a little different. But persecution is persecution for the Christian, I think, any way you look at it. Whether I'm being laughed at, whether I'm being made fun of, whether they want to enforce laws that violate this, whatever it is, you and I have to stand opposed to that on this. And that's just what Paul is continually reminding us of. I wanted to share a couple thoughts here before we move on. This whole idea of, the scriptures repeatedly tell us that there's going to be opposition. We understand that. And Paul is saying again, we should not fear that. And I would even go as far as to say that, even today, I think it might have been David or somebody mentioned it recently, that I would agree the last several years, Christianity has really been under attack, more than I've ever seen in my lifetime. And I don't want to be one of those good old days type guys, but I would have to say what I've seen in the last several years, Christianity is under attack. In more ways than one. There's so many avenues they can use. But don't be frightened by it. That's what he's saying. As you pointed out already, we've already elaborated on that verse. This is a sign of their destruction and your salvation. God's going to deal with them. And that should bring us some comfort. Not of, you're going to get it for persecuting me. I don't believe that should ever be our attitude. Our attitude should be, I wish you could see what I could see. I wish you could know who I know. I wish you could look at life through the eyes of Christ or through the gospel. I wish you could do it this way. But I'm not going to succumb. I'm not going to give in to your thinking. And as somebody pointed out, you can take my life. You can take my life. Because if I'm going to fear anything, I'm going to fear the one I stand before on the judgment day. That's who I am going to fear. But I want to be ready for that. So much here. Thoughts, comments? Just got a couple of minutes here. All right, let's go to this last section here. I love this verse 29 and 30. I was just getting real passionate about it this week. For it has been granted to you to what? All right. So, Paul's given the Philippians encouragement, right, up to this point. Reason why they should not be overwhelmed by sufferings, trials, and so many things. Why they should not be overwhelmed when they look and see him in prison. Don't be overwhelmed by that. And then he tells them, remember that not only did the Lord give them the gift of faith or salvation, but the Lord has given you the gift of suffering. That's a wow moment for me. Randy, please. Right. Right. I know. Yes. Right. Well put. I want to come back to this word granted. I want to just build on what you just said, and it puts a different perspective on the trials and sufferings. You know, when I think of something granted to me, you know, or a grant, maybe I'm going to do a study and that somebody gives me a grant for $500 or whatever. Something, I think of a gift. I think of something. You know, the more human thinking is, oh, I'm going to enjoy this. Well, guess what? We are going to enjoy this. As you stated, we are going to enjoy this gift. So it means given to us like a favor bestowed in kindness is what Paul's doing here. Now, the New Revised Standard uses this phrase, for he has graciously granted to you the privilege not only of believing, but of suffering for him as well. And I think that's another version that helps capture that point. Carolyn? Right. Right. Something just came to mind when I got to Terry, when you said that, and I'm not opening discussion of COVID and stuff like that, but when we locked down and we couldn't be together, every one of us in this room were torn apart. Not to, you know, we worked through it, but why? Because there was a suffering, there was a something that we were going through, and there's a one thing, and I'm just going to speak personally, the one thing I needed was to be with you. And it was, and I'm speaking for all of us, it was hard, and it tore us up in many ways, but look where we are right now. Terry. Right. Right. That's right. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I wanted to come back to something to Randy said a moment ago, and I wanted to elaborate on this, to what he's telling the Philippians. And here's where some get suffering wrong, as we've already stated. It's not a sign that God has abandoned us, suffering. It's not a sign of the failure of his power. It's not a sign of the defeat of his purpose. It's not a sign of his punishment for sin. And it's not a sign of their lack of faith. So often in suffering, and I think there's 5 I listed there, we try to plug one of those in. Oh, God must have changed his mind, or I must be getting punished right now, or this must be happening. If we're suffering for the gospel, for doing right, it's none of those things. And it comes back to what you said, Randy. And I think that would help us greatly when we go through suffering and trials and various things. Another thing that this is my personal advice. This is my opinion, all right? So this is my opinion. I'm going to state my opinion on this. And when we're going through things, I would be very careful trying to decide what you think God is doing and just trust him. I see so often, I've got to figure out what God's doing here. Well, when you figure it out, let me know, because I have no idea sometimes. And I don't, you know what I'm saying? There's sometimes, I'm not sure, but I'm sure going to trust him through this. I'm sure going to put my faith in Him that there is a reason for this. There is going to be an outcome. Whether I see it the day after or 10 years, I look back and go, I get it. That makes so much sense to me. Jeff, you have your hand up?
Maybe give a nice list of New Testament passages, but I'd like to add one for him. Paul complains about the flow of his flesh, he prayed with
Yeah.
God's grace is sufficient. And Paul realizes then that, okay, I need to stop relying on myself. This is going to put me to this is what I need. So sometimes I'm thankful for the trials that come my way. I'm thankful for the thorns of my flesh.
That's right.
Keep me grounded in the things that are true and good. That's what Paul's saying here. Otherwise, we can't content on earth.
That's right. When I think about the thorn in the flesh, I sometimes think of what you made the analogy of. We have our thorn in the flesh of God looking at us. Get your mind off the thorn and get your mind on me. All right, thorn's going to be there. The pain's going to be there. Get your mind on me. Let's close with this thought. We got a minute. Yes, Grant.
Somebody made a good point once. They said, sometimes we find it easy to say, I would die for Christ, because it's very unlikely to be my path. So the question is, are we willing to be embarrassed?
There you go.
Are we willing to be inconvenienced for it? Are we willing to be uncomfortable for it? Those things we find ourselves often not living in this.
Right. That's a good point. We'll wrap this up. Suffering is not proof of God's neglect, but proof of God's grace at work in our life. That's what we're at. All right. Thank you for the discussion. Wow, I really enjoyed that, especially on a Wednesday night. So Sunday, I sent out lesson 4, but Sunday, let's start working chapter 2, 1 through 11. So give that some prayerful study and discussion in your home, and we'll have some more fruitful discussion from our class. Thank you so much.